What's going on YouTube? Hope everybody out there is having a great and fabulous day. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Pretty much, how the hell are ya? Now let me go ahead and just set the stage for you. Back in the 80s, you can compare Honda's R&D department to Venice Beach, California. Literally anything that came out of that department was on steroids. You have the RC30, you have the NSR 750, you have the V65. Honda Magna putting down a Guinness World Record for the fastest production motorcycle at that time. HRC made a reputation for themselves and simultaneously setting the standard and bar that all manufacturers would have to go against. So Honda was interested in racing World Superbike. They also wanted to get into the Isle of Man. At the time, their competitors, the YZF 750 and the GSX 750, Honda wanted to get into that league, but per FIM rules and regulations, they would have to homologate a certain number of bikes to the public to be able to race in those leagues. So in the early 80s, HRC was working on their new project dubbed the RC30. Now there are two versions of this bike, the race version, which we will be mainly talking about, and the road version. While being inspired by the Honda RVF Endurance Racer, it's not supposed to be confused with the RC45. Instead, the engine is based on the RC24. The engines are almost identical externally. The only visible differences can be seen at the cylinder head and engine covers. Inside, no major parts are identical whatsoever. The gearbox, crankshaft, oil pump, connecting rods, piston, starter clutch, etc. were all bespoke to the RC30 at the time. And there was actually a race kit that you could purchase from HRC. And if I'm being honest here, you kind of do need that kit, or else your 748cc gear-driven double overhead camshaft liquid-cooled V4 would only be producing 75 horsepower at 9,500 RPMs. That was the restricted D2 number from the factory. By adding that kit, expect to gain around 45 horsepower. When the RC was first released, the components that it had on it were unheard of. Titanium connecting rods, titanium intake and exhaust valves. Anywhere where they could cut weight, but at the same time add power, they were doing it. Single-sided swing arm, making it so much easier for tire changes, quick release braking component. Now as far as the road version goes, the VFR 750, the crank orientation of the earlier years made it, if I'm being honest, not a pleasure to ride. It was a straight race bike. The clutch was very snappy, suspension was very hard. So in the later years, Honda decided to change that, pretty much translating into a much smoother riding experience on the road. And by doing this, it gave them a very broad spread of the power when it was coupled with its close ratio gearbox. You see, the VFR 750 had a ridiculously high first gear. That was done on purpose because of its racing DNA. It would improve with braking. One of the most intoxicating sounds that I believe exist on this planet is a V4. Go ahead and take a listen for yourself. God, that is such a good sounding bike. Now the RC30 had a lot of technological advancement. As far as the frame goes, it was a box section aluminum frame that was hand TIG welded to the steering stock. It was based heavily on the twin spar aluminum frame from the RVF 750. Honda called it the diamond frame concept, which was using the engine as a stress member of the bike. Now as far as the swing arm, it's really special. Honda used the French racing company Elf for their patent pending single-sided swing arm. It's funny nowadays when you think of a single-sided swing arm. You either think of Ducati or MV, maybe a Kawasaki Ninja H2. Although Honda wasn't the first company to implement the single-sided swing arm, they were the first company to mass produce it on a bike that was sold to the public. Now BMW did do this before them in the early 80s on their R80G, but that was a shaft drive, and if I'm being honest here, really didn't even look that good. It really didn't have a wow factor. It was kind of hidden at the same time, and it wasn't used for the same purpose. Honda had implemented it because of the racing DNA, the pedigree. It would make it so much easier for tire changes. So before Ducati had it, Honda actually did. I just think that's super hilarious. And like I mentioned, it was all to help with racing. The quicker that you can get a tire off, the quicker you could put a new one on, the quicker that you can get your racer down the road. Now up front, the RC30 front suspension was made by Showa. It also had wheel and brake mounts, which you can call today as quick release. Pretty much it would come out super easily, making it super quick brake jobs, super quick tire changes, and that was all derived for the need of racing, to go quicker and spend less time in the pits. You have to remember, this is a homologation bike, so a lot of the same parts that are going into the race bike are going to be on the road version, the VFR 750R. The rear wheel brake was actually carried inside near the chain and the sprocket, out of the way of the wheel, making it a lot easier for quick and smooth tire change. Nowadays, I mean, on any bike that has a single-sided swing arm, if you notice to the left of it where the chain and sprocket is, they are separate from the wheel. They are not connected to the wheel. Same goes with the brakes. They are not connected. But back in the 80s, this was unheard of. Nobody has ever thought to do what Honda did, and I just think that it is amazing. Like I said, anything that came out of Honda in the 80s was on steroids and was super over engineered, and I love it. So Showa also had their rear shock on the RC30, and like I had mentioned earlier, the RC30 in its environment on the racetrack was a pleasure to ride. Super flickable. The handling characteristics literally made that bike a track weapon back in the day. It also had a low slung fuel tank that, by the way, was hand TIG welded. It made it for a lower center of gravity, and we all know nowadays when you get everything closer to the ground, the better you're going to be able to turn, whether or not you're in a vehicle or on a motorcycle. And going to the fairings, a lot of the fairings were actually fiberglass from what I have researched. Made it a lot lighter, and it makes sense. They also had quick releases on them where you can take them off and put them back on. Now, from the research that I have done, I couldn't say without a doubt that this next thing that I'm going to be talking about was fitted on all the models, but apparently some of the bikes may have had a pro squat rear brake linkage. Pretty much what that means is that, have you ever noticed if you're going into a corner and you maybe downshift a little too early and the rear wheel which kind of hops and skips? Well, by implementing this brake linkage, it made it where they could significantly reduce that rear wheel hopping and giving the rider a much more confident, inspiring feeling for them to just plow right through the turns. So the bike was released in Japan in '87. In the following years, it was later released in Europe and finally in the States. By then, it had won a few championships in World Superbike, one of them being with their very interesting character, American rider Fred Merkel. They also won the Isle of Man TT with Carl Fargton.
So all is good in Honda land. They're winning championships, they're getting praised by all the press, all the motorcycle journalists are raving about this bike. But there is a, not that big of a problem, but, a little issue. You see, the RC30 was doing great on the racetrack, but the road version VFR 750, let's just say that sales were sluggish. You have to remember that the earlier years, the road version was coming out of the factory severely detuned and very rough to ride. Remember about that race kit I was talking about? That would almost be a must. So that's when Honda went back to the drawing board and revised their VFR 750, making it a better road version with more power, a lighter engine, but Honda still didn't see the sales that they were after. It didn't help the fact that we in the States were actually in wartime when our troops were in Desert Storm. When the bike hit the market here in the States, its MSRP was nearly $15,000 back then. So that's like almost $40,000 today. So you could understand why people were reluctant to buy it. I mean, the bike was nearly double the price of its competitors. Only 3,000 units were ever made, and sadly, in 1998, it was replaced with the VFR 800. I think one of the most interesting times in Honda's history was definitely in the 80s, and that kind of goes for all manufacturers, whether it be cars or bikes. The 80s was a time for technological advancement and pushing the bar and trying new and wild things. I feel like today, manufacturers have kind of lost that will to push the bar. I mean, sure, you have little small boutique little brands that are, setting the bar, but it just seems to me that everything has kind of gotten a little dull. Looking at this bike today, it has aged beautifully. I mean, in my eyes, when I see those two round headlights, that square tail, single-sided swing arm, white wheels with that amazing livery, it just one of the beautiful bikes I've ever seen, hands down. Coupled with the fact that it's a V4, just makes the pot even sweeter. I personally am a sucker when it comes to V-configurated engines. V4s, V-twins, V8s, not a V6 though, sorry. V12s. I just love the V configuration because of its sounds, characteristics, and the torque that you get with those engines is just bar none one of the best feelings that you can get. If you were ever interested in buying one of these rare bikes today, be ready to cough up a nice little fortune. One of these bikes in excellent condition recently just sold at a auction upwards of $100,000. Now, I haven't checked recently, but I'll probably put something up on the screen. I feel like I did see a VFR 750R go for $50,000, but it had, been ridden close to 20,000 miles. Don't be expecting to find a VFR 750R for under $60,000. It's just not gonna happen.
What happened to Honda? Will they ever produce something as wild and innovative as they once did? Or will they stick to the norm, be safe, and not test the boundaries of what can be possible in today's day and age? I don't know the answer. I can't give that to you. But what I can tell you is, the Honda VFR 750R, better known as the RC30, will go down in history as one of the most ambitious projects in motorsports history. Thank you guys for watching. Stay up. 2 wheels down. Peace.